Have you ever met someone who made you feel like you were the only person on Earth and then vanished as if you never existed? One day, they're flooding your phone with good morning texts, late night calls, promises of forever, and then, without warning, silence. No explanation, no closure. If you've ever felt that dizzy mix of love and confusion, that's exactly where my story begins. Because what he did wasn't random, it was calculated, and the way it ended shattered parts of me I didn't even know could break. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, how 3 weeks of perfect turned into a ghost story, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'm going to take you inside the mind of a love bomber and show you how to spot the danger before it destroys you. It started like every modern love story does. Quick, unexpected, and intoxicating. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was busy, guarded, and honestly, a little tired of being disappointed. But then he appeared. Not in some cinematic way, not even in person at first. It was online, a casual comment that turned into a conversation, and before I knew it, we were talking every day. His words felt like sunlight after years of cold. He said all the right things, but not in a rehearsed way. It was the way he listened, the way he remembered small details about my life that even my friends forgot. He made me feel seen, truly seen, and that alone was enough to lower my guard. At first, I told myself to take it slow. I remember laughing when he called me his person after only a few days. It was too soon, too much, but it also felt too good to question. The attention was constant. Texts in the morning, voice notes in the afternoon, calls that lasted past midnight. Every time my phone buzzed, a small surge of dopamine rushed through me. He told me he had never met anyone like me before. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I felt like home. And even though I knew it was all too fast, some part of me wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe I could finally stop searching, that maybe this was what love was supposed to feel like. He built a world around me in record time. 3 weeks. That's all it took. 3 weeks of intensity that felt like months. We had pet names, inside jokes, imaginary plans for the future. He talked about vacations we'd take, how he wanted to cook for me, what our life could look like together. And he said it all with such conviction that it was impossible not to picture it. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, or what I thought was sincerity. When he said, "I feel like I've known you forever," I smiled instead of running. It didn't feel like a red flag back then. It felt like destiny. The way he mirrored me was uncanny. If I said I liked a song, it was suddenly his favorite too. If I mentioned I loved coffee in the morning, he'd send me photos of his cup, saying it wasn't the same without me. It's strange, looking back now, how subtle manipulation can hide behind what feels like romantic effort. I mistook obsession for connection. I thought intensity meant depth. I thought consistency meant commitment. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't falling in love with me. He was studying me. Every detail I shared became a piece of the puzzle he'd later use to control how I saw him. During those 3 weeks, everything revolved around him. But I didn't see it that way. He made me believe I was the center of his world. He'd say things like, "You're the only person who understands me," or "I've never opened up to anyone like this." It felt like an honor, like I had unlocked some hidden part of him that no one else could reach. I started rearranging my days around his calls, staying up later, skipping plans, replying faster. I told myself it was mutual effort, but really, it was me being pulled deeper into his orbit. And the scariest part? I didn't notice it happening. It felt natural. I remember one night he sent me a playlist, songs about soulmates, forever, fate. He said, "Every time you listen to this, I want you to remember how much you mean to me." I listened to it on repeat for hours, feeling lucky, chosen, special. That's how love bombing works. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like magic. You don't see the trap, because it's wrapped in compliments and attention. And by the time you realize it's too much, you've already fallen too far to climb out easily. The first tiny crack appeared when he canceled a call without warning. He texted later, apologizing, saying he had a lot going on. I brushed it off. Everyone gets busy. But then it happened again. And again. He'd go from texting me 20 times a day to disappearing for hours. I always did, because I remembered the man who made me feel so wanted, and I didn't want to lose that version of him, so I forgave quickly, too quickly. He started talking about his past relationships, how every girl had taken him for granted. He said he was scared of being hurt again. I wanted to prove I was different, that I wouldn't abandon him like they did, so I became even more patient, more understanding. I comforted him, reassured him, gave him every ounce of emotional energy I had. And the more I gave, the less he seemed to need it. It's like he was testing the limits of my affection, seeing how far I'd go to keep him. Looking back, I realized I ignored so many red flags because I was addicted to the way he made me feel in the beginning. That first high of constant attention becomes a reference point. You keep chasing it, thinking if you love harder, if you stay loyal, you'll get it back. But that phase isn't love. It's bait. It's the hook before the pull. He once said something that didn't strike me as odd at the time, but now feels chilling. We were on the phone late one night, and I joked, "What if you get bored of me in a few weeks?" He laughed and said, "You'd miss me more than I'd miss you." I laughed too, thinking it was playful banter, but his tone was so casual, so certain. It was like he already knew how the story would end. That's the thing about love bombers. They plan their exits while you're still memorizing their voice. They start creating emotional dependence so that when they disappear, you crumble. I didn't know it then, but I was being conditioned to equate love with anxiety, attention with worth. Every "I love you" was a deposit in a bank he'd later withdraw from without notice. And I kept giving because I believed this intensity meant something real. If you've ever been love bombed, you know that the scariest part isn't when they leave. It's when you start realizing how easy it was for them to make you fall. Because deep down you ask yourself, why didn't I see it? But when you're in it, you're blinded by the illusion of safety. He made me feel like I'd finally found solid ground. I didn't realize I was standing in quicksand. And the more I struggled to hold on to him, the faster I sank. If I could bottle the feeling of those 3 weeks, it would taste like sugar and smoke. Sweet, addictive, but impossible to hold for long. Every day started with his name lighting up my phone, and every night ended with his voice telling me he couldn't sleep without hearing mine. It felt like a movie where I was both the star and the audience, watching my life finally take the romantic turn I'd always dreamed of. He made me feel like I was living in high definition, every emotion amplified, every gesture drenched in meaning. The world around me seemed brighter, music sounded deeper, even my reflection looked softer. That's the dangerous thing about love bombing. It makes you feel alive, like you've been colorblind and someone suddenly switched the lights on. He didn't just compliment me, he worshipped me. He'd say, "You're everything I've ever looked for," and then prove it in ways that seemed sincere. Random gifts, long messages about how lucky he felt, voice notes at 2 a.m. whispering that I was the piece he'd been chasing his whole life. It wasn't just affection, it was devotion, or at least it looked like it. Every single thing I did seemed to fascinate him. I could tell a boring story about grocery shopping, and he'd respond like I'd shared a secret treasure. He'd say things like, "I love how you think," or "You have no idea how special you are." It's hard to describe what that does to your brain when you've spent years being unseen. He asked endless questions, like he was trying to map my soul. Favorite childhood memory? Check. Biggest fear? Check. Dream vacation, comfort food, songs that make me cry. He wanted to know it all. At the time it felt intimate, like he was investing in knowing the real me. But now I realize he wasn't learning me to love me. He was learning me to mimic me. Every response I gave became ammunition to build trust faster. If I mentioned I'd been hurt by people who disappeared, he'd say, "I'd never do that to you." If I said I valued honesty, he'd overemphasize transparency. He mirrored my morals, my humor, my goals, until I couldn't tell where I ended, and he began. We met in person during the second week, and I swear, the way he looked at me could have melted glass. His eyes didn't just see me, they consumed me. He made ordinary moments feel cinematic. We walked around the city like we were the only 2 people in it. Every gesture was exaggerated, his hand finding mine, his thumb brushing against my wrist like it was a promise. When he looked at me, it felt like being chosen. He'd say, "I feel like I've known you forever," and my brain would tingle with dopamine. That's how fast the bond forms, because your mind confuses intensity with intimacy. He moved at lightning speed. By the end of week 2, he was talking about moving in together, someday soon. He brought up meeting his family, even joked about our future kids' names. It should have scared me, but it didn't. It felt like belonging, like I'd finally found someone who saw my worth and wasn't afraid to say it. Every message, every call, every "I miss you" tightened the invisible rope around me. I didn't see it as control. I saw it as connection. He made me believe that love was supposed to feel all-consuming. One night, he showed up unannounced with flowers. He said he just couldn't go another day without seeing me. I remember that moment vividly, the smell of the flowers, the way he held me like he'd found something he'd been searching for his whole life. I didn't know it then, but that kind of intensity burns too bright to last. It was never about love. It was about domination, disguised as devotion. His affection wasn't steady. It was explosive. He'd go overboard with love one moment, then withdraw slightly, creating a gap I'd scramble to fill. That's how trauma bonds are built, tiny doses of fear mixed with overwhelming pleasure. He'd say, "I've never met anyone like you," then vanish for half a day, only to come back with apologies and even more affection. Every time he pulled away, my anxiety spiked. Every time he returned, the relief felt euphoric. It trained my brain to crave his validation, like oxygen. I thought we were falling in love, but what was really happening was chemical conditioning. He'd say things that sounded deep, but were actually manipulative. "I feel like you're the only one who understands my chaos. You're different from everyone else. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you." At the time, it made me feel chosen, but those words were emotional hooks, phrases designed to make me invest more. I didn't notice that he never really shared anything about himself that wasn't performative. His vulnerability was selective, controlled. He'd reveal just enough to make me feel needed, but never enough to actually know him. The love-bombing high made me reckless. I ignored my intuition, ignored my boundaries, ignored how exhausted I was trying to keep up with his intensity. My friends noticed the change first. One of them said, "You're always on your phone now." Another joked, "You're obsessed." I laughed it off. They didn't understand what we had. I thought they were jealous, or maybe too cynical to recognize real love. That's what love bombers do. They isolate you slowly, making you believe they're the only one who truly gets you. The more he praised me, the more dependent I became. I started waiting for his approval before making small decisions, like what to wear, or how to spend my weekend. I told myself it was normal. That's what couples do, I thought. But it wasn't partnership. It was conditioning. He was building me into someone easier to control, someone who measured her worth through his reactions. There was one moment that should have opened my eyes. We were on the phone, and he said, "You don't know how lucky you are to have me. Most girls would kill for a guy like me." He said it in a teasing tone, but it lodged itself in my chest. I laughed, pretending it was harmless, but something inside me flinched. That sentence was the quiet crack in the mirror I'd been staring into for weeks. I didn't see it then, but that was the beginning of the end. The first slip in his perfect mask. He started changing in subtle ways. The constant affection became inconsistent. The compliments turned into comparisons. The good morning texts became shorter. But every time I sensed distance, he'd reel me back in with grand gestures. A sudden call, a late night "I miss you," or a story about how hard his day had been. I kept forgiving the inconsistency because I was addicted to the memory of the man who made me feel alive. Those 3 weeks felt like falling through clouds, soft, dizzying, unreal. But what I didn't know was that I wasn't falling in love. I was being pulled into quicksand, and the more I tried to hold on to the feeling, the deeper I sank. He wasn't building a future with me. He was building a fantasy around me, one that would collapse the moment he decided to vanish. The signs were all there. The speed, the intensity, the idealization. But when you're inside the storm, the lightning looks like fireworks. And I was too mesmerized by the light to notice I was standing in the middle of something dangerous. The first sign wasn't silence. It was change. Tiny, almost invisible shifts that only made sense in hindsight. The way his messages got shorter, colder. The delay before he replied. The way his "good morning beautiful" turned into a plain "morning." At first I told myself I was imagining it. Relationships evolve, right? The honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. That's what I told myself, clinging to logic when my gut was already whispering warnings. But deep down, I felt it. The warmth was fading. It was like he'd turned down the volume on us, and I was the only one still trying to hear the music. He didn't disappear suddenly. It was a slow ghosting. A drip feed of distance that trained me to accept less each day. He started canceling plans, blaming work, exhaustion, family stuff. The excuses were always vague, but delivered with just enough emotion to sound believable. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe the man who once made me feel like his whole world couldn't just lose interest overnight. So I rationalized everything. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe I'm too needy. Maybe this is what normal relationships look like after the first few weeks. I convinced myself I was being dramatic, that love doesn't always have to be fireworks. It can be quiet too. But this wasn't quiet. This was absence disguised as normalcy. He still said all the right things when he did show up. "I've just been tired. You mean so much to me. Don't overthink, okay?" That last one stuck to me like glue. Don't overthink. It became his shield against accountability. Every time I felt anxious or confused, he'd make me doubt my own instincts. "You're reading too much into things," he'd say, and I'd shrink a little more. That's how manipulation works. It's not always shouting or cruelty. Sometimes it's gentle dismissal, the kind that makes you apologize for being human. I remember one evening I was waiting for his call. We'd planned to talk after dinner, like we always did. Hours passed, and nothing. I checked my phone so many times it felt like it was part of my hand. When he finally texted the next morning, it was a casual, "Hey, sorry, fell asleep early." No apology, no explanation. Just a sentence that told me how easily he could erase me from his night. Still, I told him it was fine, because I didn't want to seem clingy. Because I was afraid that if I complained, he'd pull away even more. And that's the trap. When you start policing your own emotions to keep someone else comfortable, you've already begun to lose yourself. The more distant he became, the harder I tried to fix it. I sent longer messages, sweeter replies, more "I miss you" texts. I thought maybe if I loved harder, I could bring him back to the way he was. I didn't realize that love bombing conditions you to chase the high instead of seeing the truth. I was no longer being loved. I was being managed. He'd withdraw affection, watch me scramble, then reward me with crumbs of attention. And every time he gave me something small, a compliment, a text, a quick call, it felt like a victory. I was unknowingly competing for a connection that had already been withdrawn. There were moments when I'd catch glimpses of the man I'd fallen for. He'd send a voice note that sounded like the old hymn, warm and playful. He'd say, "You've been on my mind all day." And for a moment, everything felt right again. But those moments became shorter, rarer, and they always came right after I started to pull back. It was a pattern, a push and pull designed to keep me emotionally hooked. When I tried to walk away, he'd suddenly show affection again. When I leaned in, he'd vanish. He wasn't losing interest. He was maintaining control. I remember the night it hit me that something was deeply wrong. We were on the phone, and I brought up how distant he'd been. I tried to keep my tone calm, careful. He sighed. That deep, irritated kind of sigh that makes you feel stupid for even speaking. "Why do you always have to make everything heavy?" he said. I froze. I wasn't trying to fight. I was trying to connect. But in that moment, he made me feel like the problem. Like my desire for clarity was a flaw. I apologized, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. That was the night I started learning how to silence myself. From then on, I walked on eggshells. Every text I sent was pre-edited. Every call rehearsed in my mind before I dialed. I stopped bringing up how I felt. Instead, I focused on keeping him happy, even though I no longer knew what that meant. Sometimes, he'd go a full day without replying, and when he finally did, I'd act casual, pretending it didn't bother me. I told myself I was being mature, patient, understanding, but in truth, I was terrified. Terrified of losing someone who had already left emotionally. His tone changed too. Where there had once been warmth, now there was sarcasm. He'd tease me in ways that stung but were disguised as jokes. "You're too emotional," he'd say. "You care too much." Statements like that slowly chipped away at me. They made me question whether my love was too much, whether I was too much. And when you start believing that, it becomes easier for them to give you less, because you start to think you deserve less. The most painful part wasn't the distance. It was the confusion. Because every time I was ready to give up, he'd do something small but meaningful enough to pull me back in. A random miss you, a late-night call, a photo of something that reminded him of me. It was like he could sense the exact moment my hope was fading, and knew how to reignite it. That's the cruelty of love bombing. You're not just abandoned. You're kept on emotional life support. Never dead, never alive, just stuck in limbo, waiting for the next hit of affection that never lasts long enough. Looking back, the withdrawal phase was worse than the disappearance that followed. Because it wasn't clean. It was confusing, manipulative, and exhausting. He wasn't gone yet, but he wasn't really there either. And in that gray area, I lost myself completely. I was chasing shadows of the man he used to be, ignoring the reality of who he had become. The connection I thought we had wasn't real. It was a reflection he'd crafted to get what he wanted. Once he had it, my trust, my attention, my devotion, he didn't need the mask anymore. By the end of the third week, I barely recognized us. The calls were shorter, the texts fewer, the warmth gone. I felt like a stranger in a story I didn't remember writing. He had built me up so high just to watch me crumble quietly. And even then, even when every instinct screamed that something was wrong, I still believed he'd come back around. Because love bombers don't just make you love them, they make you doubt yourself when they stop. What I didn't realize then was that I wasn't losing him. I was losing the version of myself I had built around him. And that loss was about to hurt far more than his silence ever could. It happened so quietly I almost didn't notice at first. The messages stopped coming, the calls faded, the rhythm of us dissolved into silence. There was no fight, no explosion, no final conversation that made sense of it all. One night, I sent him a photo of the sunset because it reminded me of a moment we shared. He didn't reply. The man who once couldn't go an hour without hearing from me had disappeared without warning, without a trace. I checked my phone constantly, convincing myself there must be a reason. Maybe he lost his phone. Maybe something happened. Maybe he just needed space. That word, space, became my lifeline, the excuse I whispered to keep from accepting reality. I didn't want to believe that someone who had promised forever could vanish like smoke. But he did. And the worst part? He did it effortlessly. At first I panicked. I replayed every conversation, every detail, searching for the moment I messed up. Did I say something wrong? Did I come on too strong? My mind turned into a crime scene. Every memory, a piece of evidence I examined under a microscope. I looked for the clue that would explain how love could evaporate overnight. But there was no clue. There was only absence. A hole where a person used to be. Days passed, then a week. I texted him again, something simple. "Hey, are you okay?" Even though I wasn't. Still nothing. The silence became a language of its own, one I didn't know how to read. I checked his social media, half hoping, half dreading what I'd find. He was posting like nothing had happened. Funny memes, selfies, life moving on as if I'd never existed. That moment shattered me. It's one thing to be forgotten. Another to realize you were never real to the person who meant everything to you. It felt like grief, but without a body to bury. I couldn't explain it to anyone. How do you tell people you're mourning someone who's still alive? I'd wake up in the middle of the night expecting a message that never came. I'd hear my phone buzz and feel a rush of hope, only to see it was just another notification from a random app. The withdrawal wasn't just emotional, it was physical. My chest ached, my hands shook, my appetite vanished. I was trapped between missing him and hating myself for missing him. That's the cruelty of ghosting. It denies you closure. It leaves every door half open, every question unanswered. I'd stare at our old messages, scrolling through the words that once felt sacred. "You're my everything. I can't lose you. You make me feel alive." Now they read like lines from a script. I realized those weren't love letters. They were rehearsed performances. He had played the role of the perfect man, and the moment I fell for it, he dropped the act. People think the pain of being ghosted is about rejection. But it's deeper than that. It's about confusion, self-blame, the constant loop of why wasn't I enough. It rewires your brain to associate love with instability, affection with anxiety. Every moment of silence becomes a reminder of how disposable you were to someone who once swore they couldn't live without you. And yet, even then, a part of me hoped he'd come back. That's what trauma bonds do. They tie your self-worth to the same person who shattered it. 2 weeks into the silence I broke. I sent one last message. I don't know what happened, but if you ever cared at all, please just tell me it's over. It was the most humiliating text I've ever written, and still, no reply. That was when the reality hit. Not only had he left, but he wanted me to feel it. Ghosting wasn't avoidance, it was punishment. He wanted control even in absence. The silence wasn't a lack of communication, it was communication. It said, I decide when you matter, and when you don't. I started noticing patterns I'd missed before. The stories that never added up, the exaggerated compliments, the emotional whiplash. Every memory that once made me smile now felt like a lie I had participated in. It wasn't love, it was performance art. He had orchestrated the entire relationship to feed his ego, to prove he could make someone fall that hard, that fast, and then walk away without consequence. I was never his partner. I was his proof. The aftermath was brutal. I stopped recognizing myself. I'd stare at my reflection and wonder how I could have fallen for something so fake. I blamed myself for being too trusting, too open, too eager to believe in goodness. Nights were the worst, when the world was quiet, and my mind wouldn't stop replaying his voice. The same voice that once promised safety now haunted me. I started questioning everything. Was any of it real? Did he ever care? Or was I just an experiment in control? I tried to move on, but healing from something you can't define feels impossible. How do you grieve a person who's still out there pretending you never existed? How do you stop loving someone who never loved you, only the way you made them feel about themselves? It took me a long time to understand that what he did wasn't about me at all. Love bombers don't disappear because you did something wrong. They disappear because they got what they wanted. Admiration, validation, power. Once the thrill fades, they go hunting for their next supply. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. There were days I felt strong, convinced I was better off without him. Then there were nights I broke down over something small. A song, a smell, an old message. Healing isn't linear. It's reliving the pain until it loses its power. And for a long time, that pain ruled me. I replayed his vanishing act over and over, not realizing that every time I did, I was still letting him live rent-free in my head. Looking back now, I see that his disappearance wasn't the end. It was the revelation. It showed me the truth he'd hidden behind charm and flattery. He was never real. The man I loved was a mask, a character designed to reflect my desires back at me. And when the performance ended, he simply left the stage. No goodbye, no curtain call, just silence. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing how deeply I had lost myself in the illusion he created. I had handed over my self-worth to someone who only wanted to borrow it. He left, but the emptiness he created stayed long after. That emptiness became the space I had to rebuild myself in. And as painful as it was, that silence, the same silence that once broke me, eventually became the thing that saved me. Because in the quiet, I started hearing something I hadn't heard in weeks, my own voice. Rock bottom didn't hit me like a crash. It crept in quietly, like fog settling over a city that once felt alive. The mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up and for a few seconds, forget everything. Then the weight would drop all over again. That hollow feeling in my stomach, the silence where his messages used to be, the stillness that replaced the chaos I'd grown addicted to. I thought losing him would hurt because I missed him, but the truth was worse. I missed the version of myself that existed when I believed I was loved. There's something humiliating about admitting you were fooled. It's not just heartbreak, it's a collapse of identity. I wasn't crying over a breakup. I was grieving the death of a story I thought was real. I kept asking, how could someone say all those things and not mean any of it? How could he look me in the eyes and plan his exit at the same time? Those questions became my obsession. I thought if I could just find the reason, I'd find peace. But peace doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. And I wasn't ready to accept that the person I loved was a mirage. I started researching, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Words like love bombing, narcissistic abuse, trauma bond started appearing on my screen. Every video, every article, felt like someone had been watching my life and taking notes. It was terrifying and comforting all at once. I realized I wasn't crazy. The highs and lows, the sudden silence, the emotional confusion, it was all part of a pattern. I wasn't broken. I was manipulated, and that realization cracked something open inside me. For the first time, I stopped asking what was wrong with me and started asking what had happened to me. Still, knowing the truth didn't erase the pain. Healing felt like trying to unlearn a language I didn't remember learning. Every time I saw a text notification, my heart jumped. Every time I heard a song from our playlist, my chest tightened. I'd delete old messages, then scroll through deleted folders just to feel close to him again. It was madness. The kind of madness that comes from trying to let go of someone who never held you properly in the first place. But slowly I started noticing small victories. A full day without checking his social media. A morning where I didn't wake up thinking about him. A night where I laughed without guilt. Healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, replacing the pain one breath at a time. I remember one evening, weeks after the ghosting. I sat on my balcony watching the sky bleed from orange to dark blue. The air was still, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to pick up my phone. I realized I'd spent so long trying to fill the silence that I forgot how peaceful it could be. That was the first flicker of freedom. I began to see the relationship for what it truly was, a performance. And like every performance, it ended when the spotlight faded. I wasn't the problem. I was the audience who believed the show. There's a strange kind of awakening that comes after being love-bombed. Once you've seen how easily affection can be weaponized, you start questioning everything. Every compliment, every gesture, every, "I love you." For a while, I didn't trust anyone. I built walls so high no one could reach me. But behind those walls, something was shifting. I started turning the same curiosity I once used on him inward. Why did I fall so fast? Why did I ignore my intuition? Why did I believe that love had to feel like chaos to be real? The answers hurt, but they were honest. I realized I'd mistaken intensity for intimacy because I'd never known calm love before. I'd been raised on the idea that love had to be dramatic, passionate, consuming. So when he gave me that version, I thought it was fate. But real love isn't chaos. It's consistency. It's quiet reassurance, not grand gestures followed by vanishing acts. It's steady warmth, not scorching flames. Once I understood that, I stopped craving the fire and started searching for peace. Healing wasn't glamorous. It was ugly, raw, repetitive. Some days, I felt powerful. Other days, I felt pathetic. But I learned to stop judging my progress by how much I still missed him and started measuring it by how much I remembered myself. I began journaling, writing letters I never sent. I poured out every word I wished I'd said, every apology I'd never deserved to make. With each sentence, I took back a piece of myself. Writing became my way out of the quicksand. I also learned that forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about releasing your grip on the pain. I didn't forgive him because he deserved it. I forgave him because I deserved to stop hurting. Anger kept me connected to him as much as love did, and I didn't want any connection left. The day I stopped needing an apology was the day I started healing for real. I began noticing beauty again, the kind that exists quietly, without demanding attention. Morning sunlight spilling across my bed, the sound of rain on the window, the taste of coffee I made just for myself. These small things became my anchors. They reminded me that life doesn't stop when someone leaves. It reshapes itself. It grows new meaning in the spaces they once occupied. Slowly, I started to rebuild trust, not in other people, but in myself. I stopped asking, "Why did he leave?" and started asking, "Why did I stay after the first red flag?" That question wasn't self-blame. It was self-awareness. Because healing isn't about hating them. It's about understanding you. Once I saw how easily I'd accepted crumbs, because I was starving for affection, I made a promise to never starve myself again. There's a moment in recovery when you realize the person who broke you will never be the one to fix you. That's when you stop waiting for closure from them and start creating it yourself. My closure came the day I understood that his silence said everything his words never could. It said I was never capable of the love I pretended to give. And that truth, as painful as it was, finally set me free. Looking back now, I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as someone who learned the hard way that not everyone who says I love you knows what love means. Love isn't intensity. It isn't obsession. It isn't promises whispered under moonlight that vanish by sunrise. Love is showing up. Love is being real. Love is staying. And if someone disappears after pretending to give you the world, they never gave you love. They gave you illusion. I still believe in love. But now, I believe in a version that doesn't require me to shrink, chase, or beg. A love that grows slowly, rooted in truth, not adrenaline. The kind that doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. The kind that feels like peace, not survival. And maybe that's the gift hidden inside the heartbreak. Losing him forced me to meet myself again, to find strength in the silence, grace in the grief, and clarity in the chaos he left behind. The vanishing act that once broke me became the very thing that rebuilt me. I used to think closure came from answers, some final explanation that would make everything make sense. But now I know closure isn't something they give you. It's something you create when you finally stop waiting for them to care. The truth is, people who love bomb and disappear don't want closure. They want control. Their silence is their final act of power, a way to make you chase meaning in the emptiness they left behind. And the moment you stop chasing, you take that power back. Healing didn't arrive like a revelation. It came slowly, in quiet realizations that built on top of one another. I realized that love isn't proven by how fast it starts, but by how consistently it shows up. I realized that when someone loves you for real, you don't have to earn their attention or beg for their reassurance. You don't have to become smaller to keep them comfortable. And I realized that what I mistook for passion was actually control, disguised as devotion. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to rewrite what happened. For months, I kept thinking, if only I had done this differently. If only I had seen the signs sooner. But that's the thing about manipulation. It's designed so you can't see it when you're inside it. You don't see the quicksand while you're sinking. You only see it once you've pulled yourself out and look back at the pit. And when you finally see it for what it was, you stop blaming yourself for falling. Because it wasn't weakness, it was hope. And hope, even when misplaced, is something beautiful. I started talking about my story out loud, not for sympathy, but for strength. The more I spoke, the less power the silence had over me. Every time I said he love-bombed me and disappeared, it lost a bit of its sting. I realized there are thousands of people carrying the same invisible wound, people who've been left mid-sentence, mid-dream, mid-love. We think we're alone because no one talks about the emptiness after the love-bombing ends. But we're not alone, not even close. That's why I'm telling this story, to make sure someone watching this knows what I wish I'd known. Love-bombing isn't love. It's manipulation wearing a mask of intensity. It feels like destiny, but it's a script. It feels like connection, but it's control. And when they vanish, it's not because you weren't enough. It's because you stopped feeding their ego. You were never too much. They were never capable. For anyone listening who's been through it, who's still staring at a silent phone, replaying conversations, wondering what they could have done differently, please hear this. You did nothing wrong. You were kind. You were open. You were real. They weren't. That's the entire story. You didn't lose something genuine. You survived something deceptive. And that's not weakness. That's survival. When I finally stopped looking for him in my memories, I started finding myself in my future. I began saying yes to things I'd paused for him. I went back to my hobbies, spent time with friends I'd distanced, laughed again without fear of judgment. The world didn't feel smaller anymore. It started expanding again. I learned that the only thing more powerful than being loved is loving yourself enough to walk away from what doesn't honor you. Now, whenever I meet someone new, I no longer fall for the fireworks. I pay attention to the quiet moments, the consistency, the honesty, the calm. I look for presence, not promises. Because real love isn't a storm, it's shelter. It doesn't demand your energy. It gives you peace. It doesn't rush. It roots. Sometimes, I still think about him, not with longing, but with clarity. I don't hate him anymore. Hatred is still a form of attachment, and I don't want to carry him anywhere near my heart. I think of him the way I think of a story that once taught me something vital but no longer defines me. Because that's what he became, a lesson, not a loss. And here's what that lesson taught me. When someone disappears, don't chase the ghost. Chase yourself. Reclaim the parts of you that went missing when you started orbiting around them. Fall back in love with the version of you that existed before they convinced you that love had to hurt. Because that version is still in there, waiting for you to come home. If you're watching this right now and you're in the middle of the silence, the confusion, the what-ifs, the heartbreak, I want you to know something. The pain you feel doesn't mean you were foolish. It means you were capable of deep love. You gave without calculation. You believed without armor. That's rare. That's brave. Don't let someone's inability to value that turn you cold. Keep your warmth. Keep your heart. But next time, give it to someone who earns it slowly, not someone who demands it instantly. Remember the metaphor I used earlier. Love as quicksand. The harder you fight to keep someone who's already sinking you, the deeper you go. But once you stop struggling, once you plant your hands on solid ground and pull yourself up, you realize the strength you had all along. That's where freedom begins. Not when they come back, but when you stop wanting them to. So if my story sounds like yours, let this be your turning point. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need them to explain. You just need to decide that their disappearance will not define your worth. You are not someone who is left behind. You are someone who finally stopped chasing what was never real. And if this story helped you see yourself a little clearer, if it reminded you that healing is possible and that you're not alone, please take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel exists so we can talk about the things people are too afraid to say. The quiet manipulation, the invisible heartbreak, the recovery that takes longer than anyone admits. Because healing happens faster when we do it together. And in the comments, tell me your story. Tell me the moment you realized you were stronger than the person who tried to break you. Because someone scrolling right now might read your words and realize it's time for them to start healing too. You see, in the end, the vanishing act didn't destroy me. It revealed me. It forced me to see how deeply I can feel, how fiercely I can rise, and how powerfully I can rebuild. He disappeared, but I didn't. I stayed. I survived. And that's the kind of love story that doesn't end. It evolves. So if you ever find yourself in the same silence I once lived through, remember this. The quiet that follows heartbreak isn't empty. It's full of possibility. It's the sound of you returning to yourself. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that their disappearance was never your ending. It was your beginning. If you connected with this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. And if you've ever been love-bombed or ghosted, share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight.